views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of Paranormal Buzz Radio or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is strictly prohibited. For information on everything Paranormal Buzz Radio has to offer, visit our website, paranormalbuzzradio.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Exploring the Unknown with Rebecca and Shay. Taking stories from today's news, Rebecca and Shay will explore everything from the paranormal, supernatural, the strange and unusual, unsolved mysteries, and more. Join them as they delve deep into the unknown and mysterious, taken from news headlines. Water cooler chat with a paranormal twist. Only on Paranormal Buzz Radio.
Hey Shay, how's it going?
It's going good. It's going good. I always like when we start off these podcasts with me making you laugh right before we're recording, and so.
Yeah, I apologize for not believing you about the horse thing, and
hey,
it's just the way you said it. So
yeah, I get it. Trust me, because everybody knows I'm crazy, but I don't need to look crazier than what I already am, so.
Proof positive, I don't know everything. I don't know, just the way you said it, that just was totally hilarious.
I think I was kind of also like second guessing myself as I was talking, which is why I didn't edit it. I left the whole thing in, like, so people could hear the whole thing. Like, I actually thought I was crazy towards the end. It was like, maybe it's a rabbit. I don't know.
I talked you out of it because I was so sure, but no, you were right. You were right, Shay. You do know things.
Not much. I know a couple things. That's about it. And Shauna, she was a trooper during it.
Oh, she was.
She really was. So today we're going to combine kind of two stories into one. They're the same topic.
Yeah, this is another true crime one that is really interesting. And yeah, we've taken two articles, and part of one, a really long one, we're going to kind of cut down, and then there's another one. So hopefully we'll get like all the information on it.
What's the first article?
This one is in Rolling Stone. It's why 3 investigators blame a rash of drowning deaths on a gang of killers. This is a September 13th, 2019 article. When 24-year-old William Hurley called his girlfriend the night of October 8th, 2009, all he wanted to do was go home. The Navy veteran who'd been attending a Boston Bruins home game asked Claire Mahoney to pick him up early, explaining that he was tired from a long day of work as a greenskeeper. While on the phone with Mahoney, Hurley warned that his cell phone battery was low. When she asked for his exact location, someone in the background yelled 99 Nashua Street before the line went dead. Minutes later, Mahoney arrived at that address, but Hurley was nowhere to be found. 6 days later, his body was found in the Charles River. The cell phone from which he made that final call smashed nearby. Hurley's death was eventually ruled an undetermined drowning, with the police stating that they found no evidence of foul play. Yet, people who were close to Hurley, including Claire Mahoney, have disputed these claims, pointing to his damaged cell phone as well as injuries indicating blunt force trauma and a toxicology report that found high levels of GHB, known as a date rape drug. But Hurley isn't the first college-age male to have died under suspicious and hotly debated circumstances. More than a decade before Hurley disappeared in Boston, Fordham College senior Patrick McNeil vanished after stumbling out of a bar in 1997 on New York's Upper East Side. McNeil was missing for more than a month before his body was found floating in the East River, and his death was later declared, like Hurley's, to have been an undetermined drowning. But Kevin Gannon, one of the detectives who investigated McNeil's case, didn't agree with the official ruling on the 23-year-old's death and promised the deceased parents that he would find them answers. More than 20 years later, he's still trying. In fact, Hurley and McNeil are part of what now retired Gannon fellow NYPD detective Anthony Durarte, I can't pronounce that one, And
sounds
criminal
good to me.
Yeah, we're trying. And criminal justice professor Lee Gilbertson have called an epidemic of college-educated young white men who have disappeared from nights out with friends and were later found dead in local rivers. Like Hurley's death, most of these cases have enrolled accidental or undetermined drownings, with many blamed on alcohol consumption. But since 2008, Gannon, Duarte, and Gilbertson have argued that these deaths are instead the work of a gang-like organization of domestic terrorists, what have been coined as smiley face killers, because of happy face graffiti found at purported crime scenes. According to the trio, these men didn't drown, but were instead targeted, kidnapped, and murdered by dangerous criminals who remain at large and continue to kill. The detectives believe the crimes are motivated by jealousy and reflect a coordinated effort to go after men that the killers perceive to be privileged, who Gannon characterized as the best of the best. It's this ongoing threat with more deaths that fit the profile occurring each year that keeps the smiley face murder theory alive and led to Gannon, Duarte, and Gilbertson's 6-party Oxygen series, Smiley Face Killers: The Hunt for Justice, which premiered in June.
It was good. I actually watched that.
Yeah, I haven't watched that one. I'm going to have to go look for it now.
Yeah, it was really good.
These have been going on for a really long time.
Very long time. And they're all similar. There's a lot of back and forth on what's what, but they've been going on for a very long time. I do want to cut in, because you're going to hear a lot about GHB found at the autopsies. And one person's high level of GHB is not always medically sound. A decomposing body always has GHB in the system.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's different. Are they just saying some of these? I wonder. I know a couple of them were in the normal limits of GHB. So,
well, yeah, it'd probably be hard to determine then, especially if they're floating for a while.
Yeah, that's the problem. It has to be really high in order to tell what's what, because it does have it in the system, like I said. So.
Interesting. And that one that they talked about, if he was talking on the phone to his girlfriend and he'd taken the date rape drug, you think that he would have, she would have been able to tell on the phone that he was off a little bit.
I think, if I remember, the video was a little weird, but she also got there within minutes, I think, of talking to him. And again, I could be wrong.
Right.
I watched this in January, so I can't quite remember everything, but she got there in such a short amount of time. He should have been there.
Right.
So, very weird.
Yeah, very strange.
Yeah.
The article goes on, certainly it's a compelling idea, the type with the potential to rival that of Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer and necrophile who trolled California freeways looking for hitchhikers in the 1970s, or the still unidentified Long Island serial killer who dumped bodies of sex workers on Gilgo Beach on the island's south shore. That is, if the smiley face killers actually exist. And according to the FBI, the Center for Homicide Research, and many experts, that's a big if. When Gannon, Duarte, and Gilbertson publicly announced their theory about the smiley face killers in 2008, they claimed to have identified more than 40 potential murderers, that have been labeled accidental or undetermined drownings. Since then, they have developed additional physical evidence and, perhaps most notably, expanded their database of potential victims of the smiley face killers to 335 cases of suspicious drownings like that of Hurley. But as they outlined when we spoke for this piece, their evidence goes beyond circumstantial.
So, in my modest opinion, there's anywhere from 12 to 40 cases that have a better chance of being related to this.
Hey, 335 sounds like a lot.
I think once they just started, again, my opinion, starting to prove their theory that they just included everything. So.
Well, I think initially, yeah, you would include everything and then kind of whittle it down.
Yeah, but they don't. They just keep adding.
Huh.
So, it's very weird.
Yeah, that is strange. First and foremost, the trio point to the decomposition timelines. The lack of decomposition on the bodies is inconsistent with the period of time that victims are missing, Gannon explains. Some of the cases examined in the oxygen special include that of Dakota James, who was missing for 40 days but showed decomposition of only around 3 days, and Todd Gieb, who had been missing for 21 days but showed decomposition of around 2.5 days. Gannon also noted that the presence of land insects, lividity patterns, and the lack of bloating associated with the recovered remains suggests that the victims died on land, not in the water. The detectives also pointed out the occurrence of a particular chemical. We have the presence of GHB, which is a date rape drug usually used to facilitate rape in 99.9% of the cases.
I think that's a little high, but okay.
I think that's his guesstimation.
Yeah.
Though GHB isn't typically included on postmortem toxicology tests, many families of suspected smiley face victims have either requested that the coroner test for this chemical during the autopsy or sent Gannon, Gilbertson, and Duarte samples for them to test themselves. Taken together, the trio believe the forensic evidence proves that the victims were drugged before they were abducted, then murdered and placed into the river. While Gannon, Duarte, and Gilbertson's primary goal is to have these deaths reclassified as homicides, a second priority is proving linkage between the cases. Besides the similarities in victim profile and circumstances around their disappearance and death, they also point to 13 symbols, including smiley face graffiti that is located near what they believe to be crime scenes.
So the smiley faces themselves, I think this is a great theory, but the smiley faces themselves, it's not like a signature, and you have to look at pictures and you have to really study this case because they're all different. Is it coincidental?
Smiley face graffiti isn't uncommon or unusual. So
exactly.
Right.
But they're not. It's not like they have 20 of the same smiley faces. They're all different for the most part.
So. Yeah, that would be questionable to me. I mean, it'd be one thing if they were all in the same paint or something like that, but I don't know.
Yeah, and I do want to address one of the things they said about the decomposure. And I'm sorry, I can't think of the name right off the top of my head, but one of these people they're talking about left a bar and was killed or died and was found a month or so later. And people question it and put it in here because of the decomposition. But the water was ice, cold, frozen. So the experts have already declared that if you drown, whether you're killed first or drowned, doesn't matter, you're on the bottom, you're frozen, so that preserves the body. So when you come up, it's not going to look like you've been sitting around.
Right.
So hopefully I explained that right. I was trying.
Yeah, I was going to say, frozen water would definitely slow decomposition for sure.
Yep, definitely.
As for why these deaths haven't been labeled homicides, Duarte points to a disconnect between the police and the medical examiner's office, noting that each division is often looking to the others for clues on how to proceed. The medical examiner says, "We don't know exactly how he died, so we need to wait for the police to let us know," Duarte says, and the police say the medical examiner isn't calling it a homicide, so we're not going to make it a homicide. This type of coordination can pose challenges not only at the departmental level, but also at the jurisdictional level, as cases where victims are found in rivers often require collaboration between state and local agencies. With more pressing investigations taking priority, the investigators feel that many of the cases were either overlooked or wrapped up too quickly. Nobody's looking beyond, says Gannon.
I think it's a mixture. Sometimes you look too much and you want to see what you want to see. And other times you're not looking. The case that I just referenced with the kid that left the bar, I don't agree with the decomposition, as I said. But yet he did have head trauma that nobody, and he was found with his arms folded across his chest, which if you're drowning, that's not what happens.
Right.
So. Yeah.
But there may be other reasons that the police haven't dug past accidental drowning rulings to find evidence of the smiley face killers. As much as Gannon, Duarte, and Gilbertson are convinced, there's another possibility that these deaths are nothing more than fortunate accidents, and that the smiley face killers' hypothesis is nothing more than a conspiracy theory. In April 2008, the day after the trio publicly announced their theory, the FBI released a statement that it had not developed any evidence to support links between these tragic deaths or any evidence substantiating the theory that these deaths are the work of serial killer or killers. Instead, the letter says that the vast majority of these instances appear to be alcohol-related drownings.
That's what they always say, but from the ones that I recall, some of them, there was a few that were very intoxicated, but the kid that left the Bruins game, the kid that left the bar, and there's a couple other ones I can think of, their alcohol levels weren't that high. They would not have been impaired to the point where they didn't know what was going on.
Right.
So, which is why I think, I'm trying to say both what I agree with and what I don't, which is, I think that's why this conspiracy theory keeps living on, because there's plus and minuses on both sides.
Well, yeah. I mean, I have a hard time believing 335.
I don't believe that. Yeah.
Cases could be related and the FBI not see a connection. That to me seems a little outrageous. But I can see where, like a few, like a handful, especially if there isn't like a signature per se that connects them, like a red silk tie tied around their neck or something like that.
Right. Right. Just because there's graffiti with the smiley face, again, I know I've said it 6 times, but none of them are the same. It's not the same smiley face at each of these. And in this episode that they're talking about, they're these 3 cops here that like one of them was like 2 miles away, and they still put that in the 300 something category. So, they're like shooting themselves in the foot. They're trying to prove a theory, but if you keep throwing in all this bad stuff, you're not going to prove your theory.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you're throwing in 300 and some, that just kind of makes it like, I don't know. But if you have like 30 or 40, maybe more believable.
Yeah.
2 years later, the nonprofit Center for Homicide Research in Minneapolis released a more comprehensive study titled Drowning the Smiley Face Murder Theory. In it, the center outlined 18 empirically driven points that debunk, quote-unquote debunk, the idea that these deaths could be linked, let alone, at least in most cases, anything more than accidental drownings. This includes a lack of physical evidence of a serial killer, with researchers noting that the bodies were found without signs of torture, strangulation, or otherwise inexplicable blunt force trauma, or other evidence that could point to homicidal drowning, itself an exceptionally rare crime. Instead, medical examiners almost universally rule the deaths accidental or undetermined drownings. As for the presence of GHB, considered by some the smoking gun in Hurley's case, and others, detractors offer alternative explanations for these results, pointing to the chemical process of decomposition, the possibility that they took it willingly, and issues with the trio's testing process.
I agree with that.
The study also raises concerns about the smiley face graffiti, as photographs of the graffiti show variation in style, size, and timing, including some that appear to have been painted long before the deaths occurred. Researchers point to a lack of consistency in locating the graffiti, since authorities are only able to estimate where a body would have gone into the water. It is not possible to know exactly where the smiley face graffiti should be located to fit the pattern. Saying graffiti was found near the scenes is dubious at best, says Canadian criminologist, author, and true crime expert Michael Arnfield. In most of these cases, we don't know where the men went into the water or where they actually died. Additionally, research conducted by Artfield's own students found that a smiley face was the most common non-gang graffiti in the United States National Database. You can find in any city a smiley face graffiti tag somewhere along the water, it says. Yeah, which was my thing, smiley face. Yeah, you're going to see it everywhere. And if they don't have it close to, fresh paint, I mean, yeah. And if it's different, I don't know.
Yep. I remember, but I also think one of the weirdest one was somebody spray painted or put a picture or sticker on one of the kids' graves of a smiley face.
Oh.
I don't know if they bring that up in these or not, but yeah, that was very weird.
Yeah, that is odd.
Yeah.
What do critics of the smiley face murder theory think is happening instead? Not a gang of killers, but a pattern of college-age white males at risk for binge drinking, risky behavior, and accidental drowning. According to a 2015 report by the Centers for Disease Control, the two leading causes of death for white males under the age of 44 are accidents and suicide, respectively. A fact sheet by the CDC shows that men ages 18 to 34 are most likely to binge drink. That binge drinking is twice as common among men as it is among women, and that its risks include unintentional injuries. Yeah, duh.
Right.
The causes align with larger patterns we see data-wise across the United States and not just in college towns. Arnfield says, of course, yeah, no. Yet Gannon, Duarte, and Gilbertson aren't convinced or concerned that their theory has been debunked. They don't even have a clue what we have, Gilbertson says, of what police handling individual cases know of the trio's evidence released to GHB levels, lividity, insect presence, and decomposition rates, presence of smiley face graffiti. Though the detectives have presented their evidence in both the Oxygen series and a 2014 book entitled Case Studies in Drowning Forensics, they don't feel the majority of their jurisdictions have taken their work seriously. Yet, while the smiley face murder theory is largely dismissed by crime experts and law enforcement officials, some do give credence to Gannon, Duarte, and Gilbertson's theory. There are a lot of guys on the job, working in the field, boots on the ground type of guys who agree with us, Gannon says. I have plenty of emails from officers and detectives who have told us that we're on to something and to keep going. Some of these individuals include Detective Sergeant William Zakis from Gary, Indiana, and Officer Joe Fisher from Boston, as well as a number of forensic pathologists who appear in the Oxford series. And I think there's probably some truth to it. I mean, some of those were probably murders. I mean...
Right. I agree. Some of them... but it doesn't mean the same person. Oh, you broke up. Sorry. You go.
Oh. Now is where they're connected murders. That might be a bigger stretch.
Yeah. And again, I think when you throw everything up again on the wall to see what sticks, it doesn't help your case any.
Yeah, exactly.
It just doesn't.
Yeah. If you're throwing all that much into it, I mean.
Yeah. Because if I look at some of these cases individually, I can see why they think were murdered, or, other people were involved. But I'm not sold on the big picture of it all being the same people.
Yeah. And Gannon, Duarte, and Gilbertson aren't the only ones who have kept the smiley face murder theory alive. In fact, the idea there is a gang of dangerous young killers targeting young white men has only gained momentum over the past decade. From armchair detectives to the loved ones of the deceased, proponents continue to take to TV specials, newspaper articles, and online forums to insist on what they are convinced is true, that these young men are victims not of youthful invincibility, but of murder. For those who believe the deaths are in fact accidental drownings, this unwillingness to let go represents not the veracity of the smiley face murder theory, but of the psychological factors that impact our relationship with true crime, ambiguity, and evil. Christine Certechi, an associate professor of social work and criminology at Chatham University, explains it as the human instinct to reject the unknown. People don't like to live with ambiguity, she says. They don't like to not know. Criminologist and serial killer expert Scott Bond also pointed to the fear of ambiguity as a driving factor in these cases. We as people have a need for closure and need to understand things, Bond says. And I think that probably is true for like the families. You know, I think that accidental drowning thing, you know, getting drunk and falling in the river is probably hard for families to accept.
I think when somebody young dies, when there's not a definitive reason or it's just a quote-unquote stupid accident, that's hard for the family, no matter what.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, and you hear a lot of cases where families are questioning the autopsy results and questioning, you know, the police's theory, and they just want to make, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I think that they want the murder rather than believing the accident, just because we don't like to think of life as being as fragile as all that. You know, we like to think that there's, you know, you're not going to trip and fall and break your neck. You know, we think, well, somebody must have done that to them.
Yeah.
This desire to finger point can also contribute to a larger phenomenon called moral panic, described as the spread of fear over an often exaggerated or mischaracterized societal threat from the Salem witch trials to the satanic panic of the 1980s. The spread of moral panics has grown with the expansion of media and its influence over society. When Jack the Ripper was supposedly stalking London, for example, it was in the early stages of tabloid newspapers. As news spread around the world, people thought Jack the Ripper was in their backyard in Chicago. Bond says, of the 19th century serial killer, who may have been multiple killers active at the same time. As Artfield puts it, Jack the Ripper and the Smiley Face Killer are two great examples of the process of the press combined with opportunistic people turning a series of tragedies into the myth of killer that doesn't exist. But the reasons for attributing likely accidental deaths to something more nefarious can also be personal. I don't think people like the idea that their loved ones could have been blamed for something, Sarteshi says. They don't like the idea that they could have done something differently and have lived. It's an especially prudent thing to consider within the context of smiley face killers, where many of the deaths occurred after the victim drank alcohol and or stepped out alone. The reality is, maybe, had that person not been drunk that night or gone out, then they may not have died. Sarteshi notes, adding, that's a hard thing to sit with. Yep. Agreed.
I agree. Yeah. I think it's much more realistic that some of these are murders, some of them are accidents, than one group.
Right. Exactly. But then again, you know, to throw it on the side of the families, you know, sometimes the police want to just have it over and done with. And, you know, well, we don't know. Let's move on. Well, move on to the next. Instead of taking the time to really go through them. But then again, how much time do the police really have?
Yeah. In the case of the one that I was talking about earlier, and I keep bringing this up because it's the more recent one I watched, with the gentleman that left the bar. All right, kid, not gentleman. The kid that left the bar. Where it's very questionable of what happened. His mother was on air in her own words saying she thinks it's an accident. So, yeah.
While both sides continue to debate the smiley face murder theory, families of men like William Hurley are stuck without closure. With law enforcement decision makers satisfied with the official causes of death, Gannon, Duarte, and Gilbertson represent the only hope those who insist the police have gotten the deaths of their loved ones wrong. In turn, the trio continue to cite the families as their inspiration and motivation. Meanwhile, the bodies of young men continue to turn up in rivers across the Northeast United States and beyond, And as long as they are classified as undetermined drownings, the smiley face murder theory will persist, and so will Gannon, Duarte, and Gilbertson. In fact, the trio think they could be approaching a pivotal moment in the case. When we put out who's doing this and why, I don't think the FBI will have any option but to get involved. Gannon says nothing, not debunking attempts, FBI statements, nor expert analyses will deter the trio from pursuing what they believe is the truth. We have to do something to bring the individuals responsible for this to justice, says Gannon, and I'm telling you, we won't stop until we do. Yep, I think they definitely have something to pursue, for sure. But
I think somebody has something to pursue. I'm not sure, in my personal opinion, if it should be this group. Only because, again, they want it so bad. Like, if you investigate, same as hauntings. When we investigate, you need to go in as undecided. Like, it either is or isn't, and you can't have preconceived notions. And I definitely think...
Right, when you're looking at every undetermined drowning to decide if it's a homicide... then, you're going to see the inconsistencies and the possibilities that it could be a homicide versus looking at it as it's an accidental drowning. It's not a homicide, and being positive it isn't.
Yep, I definitely agree with that. Like, I just think they... I keep throwing this out here. Same as investigating. If you debunk what can be debunked, what you bring to the table should hold more value. Not just throw in every little noise, every little sound you hear.
Right. And maybe that's why the FBI is kind of throwing them out, because they're like, oh, everything is, versus...
Yep. Okay, guys, on that note, this is the end of part 1. Thank you very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Join us next week as we do part 2 of the Smiley Face Killers, and we wrap up with our conclusions, feelings, and our second story. And as always, join us in a Facebook group with any comments, questions, or news stories you want us to cover. Exploring the Unknown podcast with Rebecca and Shay. Thanks, guys.